Intermittent service, the condition of a piping system whereby it is not a continuous operating service, i.e., operates at regular or irregular intervals rather than continuously. Occasional turnarounds or other infrequent maintenance outages in an otherwise continuous process service does not constitute intermittent service. Internal inspection, an inspection performed on the inside surface of a piping system using visual or other NDE methods. Borescope, NDE on the outside of the pipe to determine remaining thickness does not constitute as internal inspections. Jurisdiction, a legally constituted governmental administration that may adopt rules relating to process piping systems. Level bridle, the piping assembly associated with a level gauge attached to a vessel. Lining, non-metallic or metallic material installed on the interior of pipe whose properties are better suited to resist damage from the process than the substrate materials. Localized corrosion, deterioration restricted to isolated regions of a piping system. Corrosion that is defined to a limited area of the metal surface, e.g., non-uniform corrosion. Lockout tagout, a safety procedure used to ensure that piping is properly isolated and cannot be energized or put back in service prior to the completion of inspection, maintenance, or servicing work. Major repairs, welding repairs that involve removal and replacement of large sections of piping systems. Management of change, MOC, a document management system for review and approval of changes, both physical and process. To piping systems prior to implementation of the change, MOC processes include involvement of inspection personnel that may need to alter inspection plans as a result of the change. Material verification program, a documented quality assurance procedure used to assess metallic alloy materials, including weldments and attachments where specified, to verify conformance with the selected or specified alloy material designated by the owner user. The program may include a description of alloy material testing, physical component markings, and program record keeping. Maximum allowable working pressure. The maximum internal pressure permitted in the piping system for continued operation at the most severe condition of coincident internal or external pressure and temperature, minimum or maximum expected during service. It is the same as the design temperature as defined in ASME B313 and other code sections, and subject to the same rules relating to allowances for variations of pressure or temperature or both. And if the piping system is being re-rated, the new MAWP shall be re-rated MAWP. Minimum alert thickness. A thickness greater than the minimum required thickness that provides for early warning from the for which future service life of the piping is managed through inspection and remaining life assessment. Minimum design metal temperature, minimum allowable temperature. Lowest permissible metal temperature for a given material at specified thickness based on its resistance to brittle fracture. In the case of MAT, it may be a single temperature or an envelope of allowable operating temperatures as a function of pressure. It is generally the minimum temperature at which a significant load can be applied to the piping system as defined in the applicable construction code. It might also be attained through a fitness for service evaluation. Minimum required thickness, Tmin, the thickness without corrosion allowance for each component of a piping system based on the appropriate design code calculations and code allowable stress that consider pressure, mechanical, and structural loads. Alternatively, minimum required thickness can be reassessed using fitness for service analysis in accordance with API 579.1 ASME FS1. Mixing points are locations in a process piping system where two or more streams meet. The difference in streams may be composition, temperature, or any other parameter that might cause deterioration and may require additional design considerations, operating temperatures, inspection, or process monitoring. Nonconformance, an item that is not in accordance with specified codes, standards, or other requirements. A nonconformance does not necessarily mean the item is defective or that the item is not suitable for continued service. Non-pressure boundary, components and attachments of or the portion of the piping that does not contain the process pressure. Examples: clips, shoes, repad supports, wear plates, non-stiffening insulation support rings, etc. Off-site piping. Piping systems not included within the plot boundary limits of a process unit, such as a hydrocracker, an ethylene cracker, or a crude unit. Tank farm piping and interconnected piping rack piping outside the limits of the process unit. On-site piping. Piping systems included within the plot limit of process units such as a hydrocracker, an ethylene cracker, or a crude unit. On-stream piping. Piping systems that have not been isolated and decontaminated, still connected to an in-service process equipment. Piping systems that are on-stream can be full of product during normal processing or empty, or may still have residual process fluids in them and not be currently part of the process system. Temporarily valved out of service. On-stream inspection. An inspection performed from the outside of the piping system while they are on-stream using NDE procedures to establish the suitability of the pressure boundary for continued operation. Overdue inspection. Inspections for in-service piping that remain in operation and have not been performed by the due date documented in the inspection plan and have not been deferred by documented deferral process. Overwater piping located where leakage would result in discharge into streams, rivers, bays, etc., resulting in a potential environmental incident. Owner user, the organization that exercises control over the operation, engineering, inspection, repair, alteration, pressure testing, and rating of the piping system. Owner user inspector, an authorized inspector employed by an owner user who has qualified by examination on the provisions of Section 4 in Annex A. Pipe. Pressure tight cylinder used to convey, distribute, mix, separate, discharge, meter, control, or snub fluid flows, or to transmit a fluid pressure that is ordinarily designated pipe and applicable material specifications. Materials used as tube or tubing and specifications are treated as pipe in the code when intended for pressure service external to fired heaters. Pipe internal to fire heaters should be in compliance with API 530. Pipe rack piping. Process piping that is supported by consecutive stanchions or sleepers, including straddle racks and extensions. Piping circuit. A subsection of piping systems that include piping and components that are exposed to process environments of similar corrosivity and expected damage mechanisms is of similar design conditions and construction material whereby the expected type and rate of damage can be reasonably be expected to be the same. Complex process units and piping systems are divided into piping circuits to manage the necessary inspection, data analysis, and record keeping. When establishing the boundary of a particular piping circuit, it may be sized to provide a practical package for record keeping and performing field inspection. Piping engineer. One or more persons or organizations acceptable to the owner user who are knowledgeable and experienced in the engineering disciplines associated with evaluating mechanical and material characteristics, affecting the integrity and reliability of piping components and systems. The piping engineer, by consulting with appropriate specialists, should be regarded as a composite of all entities necessary to properly address piping design requirements. Pipe spool. A section of pipe with a flange or other connecting fittings such as unions or on both ends, which allows the removal of the section from the system. Piping system. An assembly of interconnected pipe that typically are subject to the same or nearly the same process fluid composition or design conditions. Piping systems also include pipe support elements, spring, hanger, guides, etc., but do not include support structures such as structural frames, vertical and horizontal beams, and foundations. Pitting. Localized corrosion of a metal surface in a small area and takes the form of cavities called pits. Pitting can be highly localized, including a single pit or widespread on a metal surface. Positive material identification. Any physical evaluation or test of a material to confirm that material which has been or will be placed in service is consistent with the selected or specified alloy material designated by the owner user. These evaluations or tests can provide qualitative or quantitative information that's sufficient to verify the nominal alloy composition. Post-weld heat treatment. Post-weld heat treatment, a work process which consists of heating an entire weldment or section of fabricated piping to an elevated temperature after completion of welding in order to relieve the detrimental effects of welding heat, such as reducing residual stress, reducing hardness, or slightly modifying properties. ASME B313, paragraph 331. Pressure boundary. The portion of piping that contains the pressure-retaining piping elements, joined or assembled into a pressure-tight fluid-containing piping system. Pressure boundary components include pipe, tubing, fitting, flanges, gaskets, bolting, valves, and other devices such as expansion joints and flexible joints. Also see non-pressure boundary definition. Pressure design thickness. Minimum allowable pipe wall thickness needed to hold design pressure at design temperature. Pressure design thickness is determined by rating code formula, including a needed reinforcement thickness. Note 2. Pressure design thickness does not include thickness for structural loads, corrosion allowance, or mil tolerance, and therefore should not be used as the sole detriment of structural integrity for typical process piping. Primary process piping. Process piping in normal active service that cannot be valved off, or if it were valved off, would significantly affect unit operability. Primary process piping typically does not include small bore auxiliary process piping. See also secondary process piping. Procedures, a document that specifies or describes how an activity is to be performed on a piping system, often a step-by-step description. Temporary repair procedures, external inspection procedures, hot tap procedures, NDE procedures, etc. A procedure may include methods to be employed, equipment or materials to be used, qualifications or personnel involved in sequence of work. Process piping. Hydrocarbon or chemical piping located or associated with refinery or manufacturing facility. Process piping includes pipe rack, tank farm, process unit piping, but excludes utility piping, which would be steam, water, air, nitrogen, etc. Quality assurance. All planned systematic and preventative actions required to determine if materials, equipment, or service will meet specified requirements so that the piping will perform satisfactorily in service. Quality assurance plans will specify the necessary quality control activities and examinations. The contents of a quality assurance inspection management system for piping systems are outlined in 431. Quality control. Those physical activities that are conducted to check conformance with specifications in accordance with the quality assurance plan. NDT techniques, hold points, material verifications, checking certification documents, etc. Renewal. Activity that discards an existing component, fitting, or portion of a piping circuit and replaces it with new or existing spare materials of the same or better qualities as original piping components. Repair. The work necessary to restore a piping system's condition suitable for safe operation at the design conditions. If work of any restorative changes results in change of design temperature or pressure, the requirements of re-rating also shall be satisfied. Any welding, cutting, and grinding operation on a pressure-containing piping component not specifically considered an alteration is considered a repair. Repairs can be temporary or permanent. Repair organization. Any of the following. An owner, user of a piping system repairs or alters his or her own equipment in accordance with API 570. A contractor whose qualifications are acceptable to the owner, user of the piping system, and who makes repairs or alterations in accordance with API 570. Organization that is authorized by, accepted to, or otherwise not prohibited by the jurisdiction, who makes repairs in accordance with API 570. Rating. The working process of making calculations to establish pressures and temperatures appropriate for a piping system, including design pressure, temperature, MAWP, structural minimums requirement, thickness. Re-rating. A change in the design temperature, design pressure, or the maximum allowable working pressure of a piping system, also called rating. A re-rating may consist of an increase, decrease, or combination of both. Derating below original design conditions is a means of providing increased corrosion allowance. retired from service. Piping systems that are no longer going to be used for any process service. Risk-based inspection. A risk assessment and risk management process that's focused on inspection planning for piping systems for loss of containment in process facilities, which considers both the probability of failure and the consequence of failure due to materials of construction deterioration. C5.2. Scanning. The movement of a device, visual ultrasonic, over a wide area as opposed to a spot reading used to find flaws, defects. The thinnest thickness measurement at a CML or cracking in a weldment. See guidance contained in API 574. Secondary process piping. Process piping located downstream of a block valve that can be valved off without significantly affecting the process unit operability is commonly referred to as secondary process piping. Often, secondary process piping is small bore piping. Small bore piping, pipe or pipe components that are less than or equal to MPS 2. Soil to air interface. An area in which external corrosion may occur or be accelerated or partially buried pipe or pipe buried near where it ingresses from soil. The zone of corrosion will vary depending on factors such as moisture, oxygen, content of the soil, and operating temperature. The zone generally is considered to be at least 12 inches below to 6 inches above the soil interface. Pipe running parallel with the soil surface that contacts the soil is included.